There's a great deal of variation between individual fleeces, even though they're from the same flock sometimes, and especially between different breeds of sheep, you get a different kind of quality of wool from one to another, which adds to the kind of variation and then the opportunity for kind of other transference to happen across the surface. So this black will be interesting. This is the next one we're going to stretch up. I haven't really used much black, and just so happens that a friend has got a little flock.
Because the images don't have any direct visual references to anything in the world, in terms of titling, I think the smaller fleeces are named after the flocks, aren't they? The different farms.
Different farmsteads, yeah, because they were particular marks in terms of how they comb them or brush them or what kind of thing you put on them. There was more of that kind of place name, really, because they're Welsh farm names, and Welsh names are descriptive in terms of what they how they differentiate things. So it was quite nice having a kind of descriptive title to something which was kind of abstract, really, using that kind of Welsh language to look at the idea of the place and then the colour and how it was combed out as a different kind of mark.
The light here is really amazing. It's really so peaceful. I can see different flocks of sheep on the valley across. So these are directly the fleeces you took directly from these flocks?
Yeah, the most recent ones. I maybe kind of like started this process with working with industrial pigments. I mean, these kinds of things are visible in the landscape, and the colour and the mark making, and it comes from those marks on these animals that the boys actually put onto the wool in the back of the sheep. They indicate so many kinds of different things, but to an outsider, I mean, they are kind of quite abstract forms on this hairy surface, which started these ideas of this hairiness and then the flatness of painting maybe kind of coming together somehow, this animal and human interaction in the landscape.
I've seen you eyeing a few barns as we walk through the valley, actually, eyeing them up a bit.
Yeah, barn envy, yeah. It's just that kind of, maybe that aspiration to make things on an even bigger scale, which would be amazing.
It's good to know, in a way, that it's not quite, when you go in a pub, it's Paul the painter, Paul the artist, but how do the local community feel about what you're doing in the chapel and the painting? And
it's a very pragmatic place. You have to kind of like get on and work with the elements and everything else, and to be able to do that, you have to be kind of like ahead of the game, and you have to be on what you do, so it's a continual thing. It is a seasonal thing, because it's like, I do this job this time of year, I know next year I may be able to skip a year, but it will come back around again. There's this cyclical thing of that kind of that engagement.
There's attention to detail as well. That I was thinking, well, how amazing the light is today. But for you, I'm just realising it's not so much where the light is, it's where it's in the sky, it's how much is left, where the shadows are they drying something out? And actually this way that you're sort of, it's a symbiotic relationship with the environment around you.
Yeah, and I think those ideas, it's right. We've been cutting hay in May, and with that you have to get it bang on. So it's kind of like it's a materiality as well of doing that, because you leave it 2 days longer to dry out, and it's not much good. It's lost all its moisture, its goodness, which is what you need to keep the animals through the winter. So there's all these judgment calls, and so you are looking at details. You are looking at what's happening within the environment for these other reasons, because they're important. As with the colour of pigment that farmers use to mark their animals with, I use standard stock colours. And I apply them on the front of the work, on the back of the work, and in ways which push through the hairiness of the fleece. Cool. Nice one. No, they're pretty much as they were. They've only replaced some plain things. So it's kind of original. This little floor. And it's fantastic actually, kind of like manhandling the sheep into position so you can start shearing.
One of the things I see in your work is it is what it is.
Yeah.
The work is very truthful in that sense that we've got yellow pigment, we've got red pigment, we've got fleece. These are those things, and because they are what they are, you sort of get a deeper relation, because you want to look at it more, and you look at it and you see things for what they are, and how things work together. So the work works really well close up as well as far away.
Sure.
You sort of have to get close to it. You mentioned they're flat as well. I think
It's just that combination of
flat
things.
Paintings.
But getting more interested, I suppose, with the new stuff is it basically came from thinking about approaches to the application of the paint, and it really was as simple as thinking about transposing the idea of putting paint on the back of an animal, and then putting paint on the back of these things, and then what that does, similar, with the weave, like this floor one, is it reveals the structure. I mean, if you look at how I painted it, which is on the reverse, combed through, that's more reminiscent of that floor there.
Yeah.
But then that's moved on the back and the front as well, so we're bringing the two together. But working on the back does reveal more about how the surface is constructed initially.
They're kind of semantically truthful in a sense as well, in support, structure, carrier, back. A painting is a carrier, a structure, a frame. But it's like when you talk about putting the paint on the back of an animal, it's also like the animal I think you talk about it, a carrier. The animal is almost like a stretcher in a sense, or a canvas, or
for that other kind of notation, for that other kind of mark making. The speakers up or coming? Right, you know which one you are, don't you? You're the odd one out.
So when do you want to do Paul? When do you want to see Paul on it? Look at it up earlier. Look at it up earlier. Next time, another thing. I want to play the time. You got a guy about it.
I mean, fleeces, it doesn't have any money, really. You know, basically you get money, the value for your fleece is as much as you pay for it to be sheared. So, you know, it's kind of worthless. So this kind of like reusing this kind of materials to make kind of paintings with.
How far can we get in last 7, is it?
yeah,
get more than 10
sort of an adoration process going on with the fleeces. It's sort of conceptually a really nice idea that you're almost displaying the pieces as kind of best in show, sort of.
That's what I like about painting in this kind of way, is that they aren't kind of allegorical, they don't necessarily refer to anything other than the kind of nature of pigment and paint. And then when these two kind of disparate things come together, and that's when things start to kind of vibrate a bit.
I think it's particularly vibrating now as the light's sort of going. It's got to get in towards the sort of, well, it's mid-afternoon, and this one, the yellow is starting to come to the fore now. It's starting to vibrate, and the edges becoming more the contrast. It's starting to sort of sing, this one, isn't it, this time of day?
Yeah.
That's really lovely.
So then, yeah, it's a choice of kind of, it's the combination, like I say, it's the choice of palette. So if you can kind of like maybe use a grass kind of green, but that can be offset by just little bits of something, just something to start kicking off kilter a bit. And so it doesn't appear particularly natural. And that, to be honest, it helps that the flatter these areas are getting on the work, by contrast to the kind of like the hairy structure, you read it as something other than a suggestion of grass or a suggestion of sky or anything more kind of from the environment.
One of the things I like to talk more about, in terms of how you make the work compositionally, is there sort of a process that goes on?
I'll kind of grade it because I can use pretty much the whole of the fleece. Separate it a little, start simply spinning, like I say, fix it onto the stretcher. Then for this one, for example, it's beginning to look more at kind of like bringing surfaces together, so making some tension between the kind of like the hairy quality of the surface and what I can do with paint. So kind of this one was transferring paint from the flat surface onto the face. So stretching polythene on the floor, basically screwing blobs of paint, and this is basically off the shelf kind of multi-pack acrylic, so I don't really have to make any choices.
Just needs to straight out the tube.
Yeah, I don't mix or anything subjective in that way. Laid this then onto the pigment that's on the polythene. The pink is a mix. Worked it through the back of this painting so it came through the gaps in the construction. And lifted it up and let it dry face down. So then it encourages the painter to fall through these gaps, revealing the structure. You know, this is as unprocessed as I can keep it, to be honest. So I suppose that's what gives it its qualities, its roughness, its dirtiness.
So maybe I should change the term, because I think today I've talked about process, but maybe it's method rather than process. And there's a methodology, but in that methodology there's always room for movement, whereas a process probably says it's something a bit more prescriptive. And so,
it's, even the way these, you know, they're setting out initially with the fleece, everyone is different. Everyone has its own particular qualities. And so the surface will basically be what this dictates. So I don't push this to a point where I want it incredibly even. It has to be so many kind of microns thick or whatever. It's still a kind of genetic material anyway. It's that thing that hair holds, all that kind of forensic kind of information of what you eat, where you've been, all that kind of stuff, environmental conditions. So it's used in a very straightforward way. So in terms of beginning something, I mean, my form of spinning is basically to get it strong enough that I can use it. It is a spinning technique, only kind of on in a very basic form. But then, you know, each length of fleece to be used will have completely different characteristics from one to another. It's not going to be uniform. Gaps will appear, and that's where the paint falls through.
So the identity's retained throughout the process.
Yeah, this is where me and Emma got married. So the pews were here, and the pulpit was at the far end between the windows.
Did you redistribute those pews? What
There
happened to those?
was one. The majority of these pews were built in anyway, so they would kind of lift them up, carry them in one piece. Kind of thing. They had to be kind of separated out. But there were two corner pews, freestanding ones at the front, which were family pews. And lady at the top of the valley was her family seat, and she asked if she could have that. So I dropped it off for her, and then her husband said, "Never be short of wood." So it was really sweet. I've given him their family pew, and he's got a barn full of chopped wood, and if I do anything, and I'm just going to get it.
That's kind of how it works here, isn't it? In terms of favours and barter
A
and
lot
an
of
exchange of of skills and exchange of time and
Yeah.
materials and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.